All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, there's a presidential debate tomorrow night. I'm sure some of you are excited. Personally, I think absent a total meltdown on either side, it's not really going to change all that much about people's voting patterns. It's a race where the absolute vast majority of Americans have made up their minds already. And absent a massive outside shock to the system, something like the Supreme Court nominee going astray, a spike in coronavirus cases, or some other James Comey-level October surprise, you have a basic idea of how things are going to go. Which has me thinking a lot about what exactly a post-Trump GOP looks like. Donald Trump is the greatest chaos agent to rule Washington in over a century, maybe ever. His presence in 2016 was heralded as a fundamental shock to the system. As a new way for the Republican Party, a final nail in the coffin of zombie Reagan-era public policy pushed by the billionaire and think tank classes here in Washington. And as important as Trump has been for showing that there is another way forward for Republicans if they desire, it is becoming clearer by the day that the mainstream of the Republican lawmaker has not really changed one iota since Trump's election. That is both a reflection upon their own stupidity, but it also points to a central failure of the Trump project, if there even is such a thing. If Trump leaves office in January, he's going to leave Washington both irrecoverably different, but also the same in too many ways. For my first example, I'll point to a familiar villain of this show, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Johnson has always mystified me. He's about as pure of an economic libertarian as they come in the United States Senate, and yet he represents a state that voted Republican for the first time since Ronald Reagan when it went for Trump in 2016, explicitly because of Trump's pro-worker, anti-China message. And yet, what is Johnson out there saying? Well, in a Friday interview with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, he backed outsourcing, say it's better for products made, quote, dirt cheap overseas. Let's take a listen.
From my standpoint, when we don't have enough workers in this country right now, that's a real limitation to our economic growth. To me, it makes no sense for American workers to produce high labor content products. Let the billions of people around the world do that and provide us these goods, high quality, dirt cheap. I mean, that to me is economically efficient.
This is from a man who represents a state which, according to a recent report from the Economic Policy Institute, has lost 90,000 manufacturing jobs since 2001 because of our trade deficit with China. How else can you explain Johnson's comments than a mixture of pure ideology that conveniently is the same one that the billionaires want our legislators committed to? But beyond the morality or the sense of it, this is not going to work politically. Johnson currently maintains only a 32% approval rating in his own home state of Wisconsin, according to a recent Marquette University poll, mostly because he says dumb things like that. Or he's one of the chief opponents of spending more money during an economic crisis. He's openly bucked the White House's demands on spending, and there's very little question in my mind that with the realignment of the parties, he's a dead man in the next election. The guy has to know that, but I'm realizing he just doesn't care. I don't think any of them do. The path of the post-Trump GOP is becoming very clear to me. They desire to be a permanent minority party of cultural grievance and committed to obstruction. When it comes to actually doing anything to redress cultural grievance or improve the lives of the voters who back them, they will demur, citing deficit problems, or they'll claim an allegiance to some ideology that swears off the idea of government doing anything for you and for your life. Let me give you another example. Here's Senator Mike Lee over the weekend making a 2012 case that the Affordable Care Act is unconstitutional and making the case that prospective Justice Barrett should have to strike it down.
Look, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was, I believe, unconstitutional when it was enacted. It was unconstitutional when it was litigated in 2012. It was unconstitutional when Chief Justice Roberts, writing for a narrow 5-member majority, rewrote the Affordable Care Act in 2 critical ways in order to render an otherwise inevitably unconstitutional law constitutional. And so the fact that Congress chose to enact an unconstitutional law shouldn't tarnish Judge Barrett in this. Her job is to figure out whether it's unconstitutional or not.
Same old, same old. Nothing about that speech has changed in nearly a decade of American politics. It's probably the single most damaging political thing a Republican could even be talking about right now, in the middle of a pandemic and mass job loss. But that's not going to stop Senator Lee from sticking to his very principled position. That's the direction of the party, as I see it. No majority in either body. To the extent that they do anything, it will mirror Ted Cruz's conduct in Washington during the Tea Party wave, mounting pointless filibusters and obstructing the business of the government so they can pretend for their constituents that they're standing up to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris when they're really just not doing anything. And it bears repeating here. Donald Trump won for a reason. The reason is that the rock-solid free market libertarian ideology at the heart of the mainstream GOP is not desired by the vast majority of Republican voters or Americans writ large. The greatest political opportunity of the century will remain out there, waiting to be seized upon. But if a Republican is to seize it, I highly doubt it's going to emerge from the morass of the fight that is likely to come in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's likely depressing, because it means that once again, we're going to return to a 2012 dynamic where you have a neoliberal Democrat in the White House surrounded by woke ideologues, and the only opposition that he's going to find in Congress is not to any of the social agenda, but to his spending one. And meanwhile, we're on our way to expanding the permanent underclass of American society, with 30 million Americans today on unemployment rolls, accelerating permanent job losses. The damage from this depression is going to reverberate through our lives for the next decade or more. And the fools at the helm of the GOP will be still shouting about debt and deficit if the revolution eventually ever comes. And that's kind of the amazing thing, Crystal. It's Friday. Like, think about Friday. Think about the pandemic, Wisconsin, the industrial Midwest, the loss of the steel industry, and so much more. A central part of even at the RNC was that Obama's trade policy killed these types of jobs. And the man elected by those people says outsourcing is good. Let the billions of people around the world make our goods for dirt cheap. He's effectively saying it is a good thing that many of my own constituents are poor, bankrupt, and have no economic opportunity. It's incredible.
My jaw dropped when I just now listened to that soundbite, because I had not heard it before, and it's so unbelievably callous. I mean,
crazy.
Look, I used to live in the industrial Midwest, and it's part of actually what really shaped my politics, because what you realize living in one of these towns that has been stripped bare by globalization, by offshoring, and by these terrible trade deals, and you go up and down the Ohio River, for example, you go up and down throughout the state, and you see town after town after town that is exactly the same, that will do something to you. You realize that you have been fed a bunch of crap by people like ideologues like Ron Johnson, who say, oh, it's all in the name of efficiency, and it increases GDP growth, and a rising tide lifts all boats, and it's all going to trickle down. No. It's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. And to live in the state of Wisconsin, to represent the state of Wisconsin and say that crap, my mind is absolutely blown, except that I know that, as you point out, he loses for the Senate. Big deal.
He doesn't care.
He'll get a big fancy
wealthy.
job. Look at Paul Ryan, right? I mean, another Wisconsin guy. He's doing just fine. He started his blank check fund, raising millions of dollars to do whatever with it he wants to do. So as long as you stay on the orthodoxy, the Koch libertarian orthodoxy, you can cash in at the end of your tenure. No problem. So that's what he's aiming towards.
And I was thinking, I'm like, just lie. Like, just be like, oh, it's terrible, these trade, just, play lip service to it and do what everybody else does and sell you out whenever it comes, whenever you vote. But he doesn't even have the good sense to do that. That's how committed that these people are. And same thing with Mike Lee. I mean, who the hell goes on television in the middle of this fight and is like, at least make the abortion case. There's probably more people out there who would agree with you than destroying Obamacare.
Especially in Utah. Yeah. I mean, and there's a different dynamic because for him, he's in a very red state.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't have to worry about anything, any challenge from the left, from a Democrat, so he can just go out and spout his free market ideology, which again will benefit his economic prospects in the long term. I am curious what you think, though, of how this all shakes out in terms of a potential 2024 Republican primary.
Sure.
Because the counter argument is that even though these people are idiots, even though they're ideologically like bought and paid for and looking to cash in, Trump did show the political power of having a heterodox position on a few economic issues. And I do wonder if some smart Republican will basically pick up on that and run with it. And that appetite will certainly still exist in the base.
Maybe, but you have to have Trump's star power. I don't really see much of that out there right now. And
True.
I mean, that's kind of what it takes, right? You need $2 billion in earned media in order to make that happen. I don't know if that's going to happen again. And I also don't think that they're not stupid, many of these people. They're not smart either, but they're not idiots. They can see what that threat was. Now, very likely, they're not going to let Ron Johnson say stuff like that. You know, it's all going to move into the back room. It's going to be quiet, but the effective policy is going to be exactly the same thing. So very likely you could snooker Republican constituents and you could say, hey, you know, China and all this. And then on the back end, you basically do what Trump unwittingly did, which is you hire all the same people to do exactly the same thing. And so, no, I'm not particularly optimistic about what's going to happen in 2024. And they are going to spend and do everything they possibly can to build up their people who embrace Trumpist rhetoric.
Right.
Like, oh, you know, we're going to bring back our jobs and all that stuff. What does it really mean? The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act's 2.0. That's what they're actually saying whenever they mean it.
And especially because what Trump has turned Trumpism into is just personal loyalty to
It's
him.
whatever you want.
Like,
right.
I mean, we've seen that in the Senate primaries that have played out and where he's decided to weigh in and the candidates that he's backed. It hasn't been about who's most true to the message I ran on in 2016. And he himself has abandoned the message he ran on in 2016. So I could very much see 2024 playing out more along the lines of who is most sort of worshipful of Trump, and that being the definition of Trumpism rather than any of the more, you know, heterodox or unconventional economic policy positions that he took in 2016.
Let me give you another example. Johnson. Let's go back to Ron Johnson. Okay, well, Ron Johnson's the guy who wrote that Hunter Biden report, right? Lindsey Graham, all in on Mueller. What these guys do is they pick these issues which are important to Trump, and I think are important, but then they're like, oh, see, I'm with Trump. Like, I stood up on the Hunter Biden report. I'm loyal. It's a Benghazi 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, whatever it is under Biden. They can go to the constituents and be like, no, we stood up to them, right? By going up and making a stand on whatever stupid scandal that we decide we're going to be in that day. And then on the actual policy of it, listen, this is what Johnson believes. He's telling the state of Wisconsin, I hate you. Like, I'm not doing anything for you. That's disgusting. It's repulsive to me. And you see the same thing, Pennsylvania. Pat Toomey, the guy who represents that state. The guy is a pure economic libertarian. Pennsylvania, the Steel Belt. The only reason he's even a senator is because of abortion. But so many of these people do not seem to understand. And this is a failure of the Democrats, too, right? You can never see anybody highlight. If I was somebody running against Ron Johnson, I'd play it on repeat all throughout the entire state. They're not very likely to do that. That's not what the DSCC is built in order to highlight people like Chuck Schumer and all of them, largely because they basically agree. And I think that's a scam of it all, right?
The culture war is a lot easier. The, rhetorical bomb throwing, you don't even have to accomplish anything. Just if you say the right words and like signal in the right way that you're on people's team, it's a lot easier and there's no accountability for it.
There's no accountability on it, and it drives me insane. But if you want to see what post-Trump GOP looks like, I think it's going to look a lot more like that than anything like Trump.
Great stuff.
All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.